Again, for those of you that are joining, my name is Pam Beer, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. And please, everyone, if you would, please type your name and your agency or organization in the chat box so we know who's here. And Corey, we're coming up on about 4 minutes past, so why don't we get started, and I will turn the time over to you.
Okay, great. I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Corey Wilkerson. I'm the Active Transportation Program Manager at SCAG. This program is funded through a grant program from the California Office of Traffic Safety. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I believe we're going to start off with, I'm going to go through a quick presentation on our Go Human program. I believe, Jennifer, you have that queued up.
Would you like me to skip forward to the Go Human?
Yeah, this is all meeting logistics stuff. Yeah, Q&A at the end. Go ahead and hit the next slide. Yeah. All right. We can introduce folks as we come around to them. Okay, let me make sure I got my notes here. So I want to share a little bit of background with you about the region's existing conditions to provide some context for why we're holding the traffic safety peer exchanges. I also want to share with you some more information about the Go Human Education Encouragement Campaign and the resources that are available to you as you work to reduce fatalities and serious injuries in your communities. Go ahead and let's start with the next slide. So, as many of you are aware, our region is home to about 19 million people. That's about half the entire state's population, and we have about 13 million licensed drivers. Each year, on average, almost 1,500 people die on local roadways. 5,500 people are seriously injured, and 124,000 people sustain injuries in traffic collisions in the region. We anticipate that as the region emerges from the pandemic, that the rates of fatalities and serious injuries are going to continue to rise, particularly if people shift away from public transit and shared vehicles, which was a pattern that we were seeing during the pandemic. Go ahead and next slide. So collisions are occurring in every community across the region. So whether you're looking at, Thousand Oaks up in Ventura County, all the way out to El Centro in Imperial County, they're happening everywhere. However, a majority of them, more than 70% of the fatal and serious injury collisions, are occurring in urban areas on local roads. Next slide, please. So across the region, about a quarter of the collisions are a result of unsafe speed. And I'm sure that many of you already know this. The important thing to note is the survivability of a collision decreases significantly as speed increases. There's more information and a detailed analysis included in our Regional Transportation Safety Existing Conditions report. And we're going to link to that in the chat. We just completed an update of this report, and it provides a region-wide and county-level breakdowns for you. So we know that we have our work cut out for us. In our effort to eliminate serious injuries and fatal collisions across the region, we at SCAG are engaged in a variety of different efforts, including these peer exchanges that we're doing now, and our Go Human campaign. Go ahead with the next slide. So the Go Human campaign launched in 2015 to reduce traffic collisions and encourage people to walk and bike more. Now, since then, Go Human activities have expanded the conversation beyond vehicular violence into a suite of programs that mainly fall into these three categories highlighted on the slide. Co-branding and regional advertising. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these yard signs and the billboards and things like that. Temporary safety demonstrations and programming. That's using our Go Human kit of parts that's available to any local agency across the region that is interested in demonstrating something. And then safety workshops, webinars, technical assistance, basically what we're doing today. Next slide. So you guys have seen the co-brand stuff. All these materials can be requested at the Go Human website at no cost. Safety messaging and materials are co-branded with partner logos using preset or custom messaging, and come in different forms of like lawn signs, banners, bus shelter ads, etc. When I worked at the city of Santa Ana, we actually used the Go Human branding materials, but we took our own photos and we did our own messaging to make it more culturally relevant to the community that I was working in. And that was a fantastic experience. And we got a lot of support from SCAG at the time. So now here at SCAG, we're happy to help and support in any way possible. Next slide, please. So the Go Human kit of parts is provided at no cost to any local agency. It resembles kind of modular pieces that can be assembled to demonstrate different street designs. It includes curb extensions, parklets, crosswalks, protected bike lanes, median refuge islands. The kit comes with marketing materials, and it's meant to show how a typical street can transform into one that centers around all users, including pedestrians and bicyclists. Next slide, please. So recently, Go Human received 45 project proposals for our Community Streets Mini Grants program, which is funding meant to build street-level community resilience and increase the safety of people most harmed by collisions. Go Human will be announcing the awardees later this month, and the activations should start hopefully this summer. Next slide, please. One of the things we're also doing is we have a new community ambassadors program, which is a kind of a participatory planning and leadership series that will be taking place in Imperial, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties. Those are the target counties for the program this round. Ambassadors are going to be compensated for their time, and spots are still open in each county. You can apply online at our Go Human website. This is a program that we're doing in partnership with a few community-based organizations, and it's really exciting. The idea behind it is to focus on less people but higher quality information than a lot of our other Go Human programs. So it's kind of exciting. I did a similar program in Santa Ana when I was there. So of course, all of you guys are participating today in our traffic safety peer challenges, which are part of Go Human's ongoing efforts to increase safety. Please go to the website, gohumansocal.org, to register for more of the traffic safety peer exchanges and learn more about the programs that I just detailed. And you can keep up with all the Go Human programs by signing up with the quarterly newsletter and following Go Human on social media at Go Human SoCal. All right. So that's all I got for now. Now I believe we're going to kick it over to, who's next? Go ahead and hit the next slide. Who we got next? I don't remember the order. You guys got to forgive me.
It's okay. It's okay, Corey. I did, again, my name is Pam Beer. For those of you who didn't hear me before, I am with Cambridge Systematics, and we are a consultant on this project. Before we get to our speakers, we wanted to make sure you learned a little bit more about this Go Human campaign that is sponsoring this effort. This makes the second in a series of 12 peer exchanges we're going to be doing. And this one, of course, focuses on a very important issue, and that's funding. As the title says, you can't have traffic safety be a reality without funding. Today, we're going to be hearing from a representative from Caltrans, someone from a more regional perspective, and then somebody who does funding, gets funding and does projects on a more local level. This is a peer exchange, and because it is a peer exchange, we really rely on all of you to be as participatory as you can. It's much easier when we do this in person, but as all of us have experienced over this past year, we've got to be able to do this virtually, and you can have a pretty active event if everyone will just volunteer. And if you've got a question, either raise your hand, and you can see that feature. It would be down where it says reactions down along the bottom of your screen, or type a question into the chat box. If you think of something later and you need more information, please type that question and we'll get back to you. I'm going to ask now if we could ask we have a couple of questions. We wanted to get a feeling of what you all have experienced in terms of funding. So we have a couple of poll questions. And Jennifer, if we could bring up those first two. So everybody, if you'd please answer our questions. Number one, have you ever successfully applied for and received funding for a safety project or program? And number two, has your community not implemented a safety program because you had difficulty in obtaining funding? Let's go ahead and answer that. And about half of the folks have answered. Looks like we've got a pretty experienced group of those of you who responded. Nearly 70% of you have done some kind of a funding proposal for a safety program or project. And about that many also have experienced difficulty in getting that funding. So as we can see, it's not always easy to do. And these speakers today are going to be able to give us some very valuable tips on not only what's available, but how to make your funding proposals successful. Our first speaker, and if you can bring up that presentation for Robert Peterson, he is with Caltrans and has been at Caltrans for 33 years, the majority of which has been involved in traffic safety, starting from investigating, reviewing, and approving safety projects at the district level to managing safety programs at headquarters. He is currently the office chief for federal programs in the Division of Local Assistance, as well as handling bridge and emergency relief programs for local agencies. One of his notable accomplishments was championing the introduction of high friction treatment into California back in 2008. When he is not at Caltrans, he enjoys spending time with his family, camping and boating with his wife and their 3 sons. So if we can take the poll and remove that, I will now turn the time over to Robert Peterson from Caltrans. Robert?
Okay, thank you, Pam. Yeah, so I'm going to go through my talking about the local 8-SIP program, and as most maybe know on the call here, that we've gone through cycle 10, and so kind of go through that, and then some tips and funding strategy. So go to the next slide. So I have two of my managers on the call as well. And so we're here to answer any questions that you may have. As you know, the local HSIP is a funding stream that's been given to specifically to the local local HSIP, or to the local side of HSIP. As you know, every state has an HSIP program, and so from there we get a portion of that funding that is dedicated to local agencies, which is great. A lot of other states have to compete with the state side, but we have the benefit of having this funding that comes to us, and then me and my managers manage the program. Next slide. So we're going to go through just a quick, what is the program about? So this is just a high level of maybe ones that are not familiar with it. I'm sure majority are. Then we're going to do an overview of just what we saw in cycle 10, and some tips on how to be successful, and then a future call, and then a little bit about local road safety plans. So let's get started. So just as most likely know, next slide. Sorry. So next slide is, you can read this in the federal legislation, and this is something that's been around a while, but the whole point of the program is to reduce fatals and serious injuries on all public roads. This is not for specific roads. It's not for state highways, not for certain classifications, but if you have an issue on any public road, it's eligible. And of course, one of the categories that FHWA wants that for this program is it has to be based on the elements of the SHSP. If you're not familiar with that term, I encourage you to Google that. That has been around since 2005, where every state has to have a plan, and it's a high level plan. And the local road safety plans is really the more or less really the details down to the local level. And so that's where we were really look at the local road safety plan is that element that's really driving where the projects, hopefully the locals will be doing, and when you do a plan that you'll be bringing forward with those applications as a result of that plan. Of course, it has to be data driven, and then target identified through a safety issue. And of course, the bottom line that we want to reduce those fatals and serious injuries that the state is experiencing. As you can imagine, the SCAG area is very much important for us, because that's where the numbers are, as you can expect. So a lot of times I say, so goes Southern California, so goes our numbers. And so this is really one of the things we're looking at is making that effort to see if we can drive down the numbers in the SCAG region, and that will help the numbers in California. Next slide. So just kind of a high level, we get $81 million a year. California gets $204 million. So there's just kind of an overall perspective. So we get typically about 10% of the program. If you start looking at federal numbers, usually 10% of the funding usually comes to California. And in our case here, of course, then it gets carved out for the local side to administer. Next slide. Any agency can apply. We do have a tribal set aside for the tribal governments. That's something we started a couple years ago. Eligible projects, any work on public owned roadways, pedestrian bicycle pathways that correct or improve safety for users. We really prefer projects that are, quickly to be delivered, minimum right-of-way environmental impacts. That's something we really encourage. We have deadlines that we abide by as far as getting it to construction and getting it completed. Early on when the program started, the restrictions were not as, the guidelines were not as restrictive. And so unfortunately, some projects that have been around a while are still on our books. trying to work their way through the process. And so this is something we've changed recently to really minimize that type of work to get these projects out on the roadway and realized the benefits. Next slide. Just quickly a recap. As you can see, we've funded a lot of projects since the start of this program. Last year, we really had almost a record number of applications that came in from this last call, cycle 10. So me and my staff were really busy at reviewing the applications. We had about almost 500 million, it was about $450 million worth of ask. Unfortunately, we could only fund 227. And so it was a lot of applications that came in. And as you can see here, we received 382, only could fund 266. The average BCR was 24.3, which is, as you can see, the highest ever. And, it's one of those, the way I would look at it is the reason why we had such a high BC was we really have been getting some good quality applications in. And I think it's as a result of the analysis that the agencies are doing with the SARP that we started out with, and then the plans later on. And I think we're seeing that effect from those safety analysis that are being done. So really a good work. Unfortunately, we couldn't fund everything. So I guess my plea to everyone is, if you have an application that did not get funded, really, I would encourage you to try to find other funding sources out there to fund those applications. There was a lot of good applications we could not fund this go around, and so I wouldn't consider it as that we rejected it. We just didn't have the funding. I wish we had more funding. That's something that we're really trying to see in this next legislation bill or whatever, that we can try to get a bigger carve out when we do the split between the state and the local side of the funding. So hopefully we can make that happen. Next slide, please. Yes, BCR stands for benefit cost ratio. That's the benefit cost for the applications. And then we have the set aside. So so this is just kind of a high level of the availability that we had. There's no guarantee that we're going to have that amount of money the next go around. It depends on how many applications get or how many projects get delivered. So the more projects that get delivered, the more that we don't have to carry on our books. And so with the next call, it's always an approximation. And in this go around, as you see here, we were able to exchange our federal funds with state funds. And so what happens is the federal funds come into the local side of the house, and we actually give it back to the state. And in return, we get state funds. And because of that, we could just follow the state fund process, and there's a lot less paperwork and a lot less delivery issues. And that was one of the things that the locals pushed a couple of years ago for that funding bill, and it happened. And so we are now making it a realization. And so we've got it all in place for cycle 10. And so every project that we successfully brought forward, it will have state funds only. So you don't have to have $1 of federal funds does not be on that project to deliver. So the realization is hopefully they can get funded or get delivered quicker, and don't have to deal maybe with Caltrans, because we are NEPA delegated. You have to work with Caltrans on the NEPA. Well, now it's CEQA, and so you can do your self-certification for that. Which I think is going to be a positive. And so for the future calls, it's going to be state funds as much as we're anticipating. Everything from here on out is going to be state funds as much as possible. There might be exceptions, but that's our goal. Next slide. So just kind of go through, we had the minimum BCR was 3.5. The highest BCR projects got funded. And so that's how we work we basically line them up from top to bottom, and the highest ones get funding. And then we go all the way down until we reach our funding limitation, and then we have a cutoff. We also have set-asides, which have been proved to be very, very popular, especially the pedestrian crossing enhancements. In those set-asides, we restrict the countermeasures that can be used and the funding, but you don't need to show crashes. Our hopes is you're looking at your roadway and putting these type of countermeasures in your highest priority locations, highest risk, I should say, because maybe you don't have the crashes there, but you're looking at putting in these enhancements for peg crossings, guardrail upgrades, and then installing edge lines. So these are what we did for cycle 10. Each cycle, sometimes they change. Last time we had horizontal curves, horizontal warning signs as a set aside. And so with this next cycle, we will be working with the local ASIP advisory committee to come up with the next set of sides, and they may be the same. We don't know. We'll talk to the team, and it'll be a group effort. And the committees comprise, of course, local from reps from the League of Cities and SCAG and FHWA and other ones, a couple of them I can't remember right now. So let's go to the next slide. And so I just want to kind of go through next slide. So cycle 10 was we had really good applications, but this is kind of how to be successful in your HIP application. And one of the things that we, because when we do the review, we make sure that the countermeasures match your crash data, match your pattern. And so that was one of the things that we look at. So really to be successful, it's a technical process, but we don't want see any flaws, things like that. If we see applications where countermeasures are used for crash types that are not conducive to reducing, that's a flaw. Also, to maximize your project benefits, apply multiple safety countermeasures when appropriate. You can use up to 3 per application. And also, you can develop systemic safety projects when possible. So really looking at multiple locations with similar crash patterns and then applying that same low-cost countermeasure. And that was one of the things that we found, especially this go around, where a lot of agencies took advantage of doing this. And so we were able to fund a lot of countermeasures across many miles of roadway this go around than I think I've ever seen before. And because of that, we were able to, and you'll see in the next slides here how many countermeasures we were able to fund. So that's one of the things that you really can look at to help out with get a really high BC. And of course, using a low cost countermeasures when possible, and then minimize your non-safety components. So, because everything that you throw into the application, it basically lowers your BC, even though it maybe not be part of the BC. You say, well, I want to add some other elements to the application. That can be done, but it all gets calculated in your benefit cost analysis, and of course then it lowers your BC. So it's by doing this, it is basically really has helped cut out a lot of the other components that should be maybe funded by another project. And really keep it a pure safety project. Next slide. So this go around, we had a cutoff of 12, which was really the highest ever that we've ever had. Sometimes agencies will ask us, well, what do you think the BC will be this time? Well, it all depends on how many applications we get. So unfortunately, we were able to, like of all the set-asides, we were able to fund 119 out of 123, which was good. Every one of them stayed within the restrictions that we have set aside for those. Some of them we couldn't because they come forward with ineligible work, but for the most part, we were able to fund every one of those. And then just I asked my staff to pull out the SCAG region. As you can see here, 37, we really got, the SCAG region was very successful in getting a lot of funding. So about $83 million, about a 40% for cycle 10, and then for 99 projects. And I think on those were on the set aside. Or 99 projects of the 259 that were from the SCAG region. Next slide. So these are just the next couple slides is just really what we installed, what we approved this time. So as you can see, we didn't, as far as the upgrades at intersections, in years past, we've always had more signals. It seemed like the signals were very popular, but when we said we need to show that the signals to be, we need the crash warrants, then they look for other funding mechanisms. So a lot of our signals are looking at upgrades to existing intersections. And so as you can see here, we installed left turn phases at 119, hardware improvements at 1,300 intersections, flashing beacons, lighting. We even were able to approve a couple of 7 roundabouts. As you know, they're probably not the cheapest, but we were able to fund 7 of those. Next one. This is ped and bike safety improvements. This is one area that that we feel like we're doing a really good job of dedicating a lot of the funding, even though that we have it as a benefit cost. We don't have set aside for ped and bike, but they compete very well when it comes to improvements in our program. About 1/3 of our program actually goes to ped and bike improvements. One of the popular things that are being looked at right now is, leading pedestrian intervals. That's something that started last time, and this time we had 604 intersections, 198 rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So really, we've done a really good job of providing a lot of good low-cost safety benefits across many intersections across the state. Next slide. And then here's one for the roadway improvements. From curve warning signs to upgrading signs, high friction, rumble stripes across 400 miles, edge lines around 600 miles. So you can see that we've done a really good job this time, and I expect the next cycle will be the same as far as funding a lot of countermeasures with. And the project costs, they did an average of project costs and running between 800 and 900,000 per project, which is really good compared to what I see on the state side, and that includes support. So so we're very pleased at what we've been seeing when it comes to applications. Next slide. So future call, as you know, it's every other year. So cycle 11 is coming up in May of next year. So sometimes you think, well, that's just a long ways away, but now's the time to start looking at your what maybe didn't get funded, what's come up. As you know, local road safety plans will be a requirement to have to be eligible to apply for cycle 11. So I think hopefully everybody's aware of that. We've got funding available. I'll have that in the future in a couple slides here. But so that's going to be a requirement this go around. We say local road safety plan or equivalent. So if you have a SARP that's eligible, if you've got a Vision Zero, of course that's eligible. Anything that shows that you have a plan where your highest priorities are in your community or your city or county, those will work. It doesn't have to be called a local road safety plan. It could be called a roadway plan. It could be something or a safety, but hopefully that plan will be saying, hey, we could take what's in our plan and put engineering applications or engineering countermeasures into this application, which is a direct result of our plan. That's really what we're looking for. Next slide. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned about this local road safety plan, we started out with the SARP. You're probably familiar with the SARP, and a lot of the SARPs did get funded, but it was more on the engineering side and really not encompassing all the 4 E's. And so really is you could look on our website. FHWA has lots of information on local road safety plans. They have a do-it-yourself kit. But we're providing some funding. Maybe it could be just seed funding if you want to be more the project or the plan to be more in depth. That's certainly, you're welcome to provide more funding for that. But the whole point of it is really getting everybody to the table and focusing on the 4 E's. And then from there, coming up with actions from that. And it could be, of course, engineering to enforcement to where do we want to focus our efforts in all those areas. We provided funding for 256 agencies, about 110 within the SCAG region. So there's still $1 million of funding still available. So and hopefully ones that have not taken advantage of that, just contact your local DLAE office, and you can get that. There's an application to fill out. It's very simple to fill out, and then from there we'll be able to get your allocated funding for that. Next slide. So that's all I got. And like I said, if there's any questions, we keep our website up to date. We have a lot of information in there as far as what was successful for the cycle 10, all the projects in there. We have the guidelines. We have all the things in there. Just type in California Local HSIP and you can find our website for anything else. And if there's any other follow-up, you can work through your district local assistance engineer or whatever to make it happen. So as far as the office to contact for funding, contact the District 7. If you're out of District 7, Steve Novotny, he's the DLAE. You just go to our website and all those are listed as far as your local assistance engineer and who to contact. And then from there, they'll send a request up to us.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was great. And everyone, the link to that local assistance website is in the chat box. It looks like we have a question from Courtney. Is there any grant application technical assistance for HSIP?
As far as putting the application together?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, we don't provide that type of funding. Obviously we're limited on our funding, and so every dollar that we give to something else is taken away from projects. So the funding right now we're using it for, because obviously HSIP is federal funds, and so we have to be careful on how we spend the funding. So right now it is eligible to provide for planning. But any effort as far as putting applications together really would have to be up to the agency to pay for that.
Courtney also had a tip that if you're developing an active transportation plan or a first last mile plan or any other type of safety plan, part of your contract could include a consultant, which they were successful in doing when it came to doing an application. And then Carla, is your office the one to contact for funding for a local road safety plan?
I think she's asking which office to contact.
Sorry?
Looks like she's asking what office to contact for local road safety plan funding.
Yeah, Robert, is that your office to contact for?
No, we actually, we're in headquarters, and so we have 12 DLAEs in around the state. And so District 7 has a DLAE, Steve Novotny. But if you just type in DLAE on our web, on a Google search, you'll come up with the, all the list of the DLAEs. And then from there, you can make the request through Steve. And then from there, you'll fill out a app. On our website, there's a local road safety plan application You fill that out, send it to him or send it to him. I think his contact, he has an ASIP coordinator. And then from there, they'll send that up to us and then they'll let you know when the funding is set. The money is there. It's just a matter of we allocate that out to the agency and make that happen. So, you know, the turnaround is very quick. We don't need to go to the CTC or anything like that to get the approval. All that is all been done, and we just got money in the bank ready to be allocated out.
Matt Gertz also indicated that they applied for a PHB through the quarter, but they couldn't get the BCR application. I guess they didn't meet the minimum on the volumes, and they were just under the BCR cutoff, so they had to look for funding elsewhere. And I'm sure that's the experience with some other offices as well. Why don't we, before we leave this issue, because Robert did talk about the importance of local road safety plan. Jennifer, if you just pull up that Zoom question number 3, let's find out how much experience people have had with local road safety plans in the area or on the line. You go ahead and just take a couple of minutes and answer that. Has your community developed or is your community developing or has it developed a local road safety plan or its equivalent? That could be a Vision Zero plan or any other kind of safety plan. Thank you, Warren. Warren also put in the link as well to the local assistance contacts. We only have about 12 of the 30 responding, but 8 of you have done a local road safety plan. It is a proven countermeasure and does work. So let's move on to our next speaker. We're going to hear from Jonathan Matz from the Safe Routes Partnership. He is the California Senior Policy Manager. That's a national program. In his role, he works to promote state and local policies that facilitate active transportation and safe streets. He advises governments and agencies in low-income communities on safe streets policies and helps them build capacity and secure funding for safe routes to schools, infrastructure, and planning. An avid pedestrian and cyclist, he is thrilled to return to his home state of California and continue his work in sustainable transportation. So I will turn it over to you, Jonathan, for your presentation on what you've been doing at the Safe Routes Partnership.
Thanks. And a couple housekeeping things. I believe that's actually the last slide of my presentation. So if we could go to the beginning of it, that'd be great. And also, I'm just realizing that I need to update my bio because it was more than 4 years ago that I returned home to California. So there we go. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I believe my bio speaks for itself, so I'll go forward. I'm going to speak just a little bit today about specifically funding active transportation infrastructure and a program that I imagine most people on this call are somewhat familiar with. It's the Active Transportation Program. You can skip ahead a couple slides, please. One more. I need to update that too. Sorry about that. Before quickly getting into that, just a little bit about us. We're a national organization founded, I believe, in 2005. And we have done local policy in various areas throughout the country intermittently since our foundation. Our California policy program is at least 10 years old, I believe. And I focus on statewide policy and advocacy, with a lot of advocacy around the budget and legislative priorities that involve active transportation and equity as well. But funding and technical assistance is about half of my my job too. Next slide, please. This 6 E's of Safe Routes to School, just quickly for those who have been following, obviously. The E's of Safe Routes to School and a Vision Zero are kind of frequently updated, but here's the most recent list. Next, please. And so briefly on the active transportation program, next. It's been around since 2013. I imagine many of you on the call have submitted applications to run every couple years. And it was really set up to accomplish mode shift, enhance safety for non-motorized users, reduce greenhouse gas reductions through reducing the reliance on automobiles, enhancing public health through both those emissions reductions as well as encouraging increased physical activity by making it safer and more attractive to walk and bike. And there's also a high priority on making sure that a large portion of the funds go to disadvantaged communities, which have traditionally been cut out of a lot of transportation planning and financing, and many times have had transportation infrastructure happen to them rather than happen for them. Yes, and I saw the question there. I'm not quite sure how that slide managed to get in there. That's an oversight of mine. So apologies for that, Julia. Next slide, please. The ATP funds a number of different kinds of projects. So you can apply to do different things through the ATP. It used to be that there was one application for all different kinds of projects that an applicant intended to do, and then starting in cycle 4, they've been split up. So different applications for different types of projects. You can apply to create a plan, and actually we at the partnership are going to be doing a webinar on the value of that step. And you can create an active transportation plan, a pedestrian or bicycle plan, or a safe routes to school plan. And we've seen a lot of value in using that as a springboard to get further funding in subsequent ATP cycles for actual infrastructure improvements. You can apply to do a non-infrastructure program through various kinds of educational and encouragement programs. Not always focused on schools, but that tends to be the main focus. And then the infrastructure applications have been split up into 3 different sizes: small infrastructure, medium, and large. And those are basically tagged to the request amount of your funds. And then again, apologies here. I seem to have actually swapped out different slides, but the threshold between small and medium infrastructure as of this most recent cycle has been bumped up to 2 million from 1.5 million before. And the applications for those are generally quite similar, but the more money you're asking for, the more information you're asked to fill out, as you know, is equitable. So the applications become a little bit more time consuming as they go up in dollar amount and scoping size. The points are somewhat shifted around also between those size infrastructures as well. Like, for example, in the large infrastructure side, there are more points available or more points at play for public engagement. The logic being that the larger an investment, the greater a burden there should be on the applicant to demonstrate that they've really engaged with the broadest possible swath of their community, and particularly the most disadvantaged segments of it. So there are some changes according in that regard. The last point I would mention is that you can also apply to do both infrastructure improvements coupled with a non-infrastructure program in your application. These actually tend to be the most successful types of applications. So, for example, a local government would apply to do infrastructure improvements around one or more of its schools and partner with, for example, the county health department or a local nonprofit group to do encouragement programs at that school. It would be one application with various parts filled out by the different partners. Generally, those those grants go to the agency responsible for the infrastructure part. I mean, that's usually the biggest part of the actual funds involved. But we found that really kind of consistently across cycles, those combined infrastructure, non-infrastructure grants, whether they're small, medium, or large, tend to perform better than either standalone non-infrastructure or standalone infrastructure grants. We think there's a number of reasons for that. They both in terms of the actual partnership that's necessary to create the application, that it usually ends up showing through in a lot of the public engagement and health data required for the application. So we recommend it as a best practice just in terms of delivering the best results, and that also seems to bear out in the chances of success in the active transportation program. Next slide, please. So a little bit of how the selection works. The program is managed by the California Transportation Commission. All applications are graded on a score of 100 points. As I mentioned before, the breakdown of those 100 points varies a little bit depending on what kind of project you're applying to fund. Then the funds are kind of divvied out through a few different competitions. Half at the initial go are delivered through the statewide competition. So all applications come in, and then they're graded by 2-person evaluation teams, over 50 teams, I believe. I've done it a couple times. And the CTC will just fund down the list of the highest scoring applicants until its portion of the funds is used up. Then an additional 10% will be used to fund down, in a similar process, applications that come in from counties that fit into the small urban rural category. And then the remainder is dispersed to the 10 largest metropolitan planning organizations like SCAG, for example, that will have a good amount of autonomy to run their own selection processes and maybe regrade applications within as well. Next slide, please. So the funds, SB1 from 2017 made the program significantly larger than it had been previously. It's still vastly oversubscribed. I have just kind of completed an analysis of cycle 5 and need to update these numbers. But the number of applications has been decreasing since cycle 3, and it continued to decrease from cycle 4. But the budget requests have gone up, which means that the competitiveness has largely stayed the same, maybe even increased. The cutoff score in cycle 5 was 92. And there's a little bit of uncertainty still remaining about just how much the cycle 5 will be augmented due to the kind of unprecedented budget surplus that we have. It seems to be at a minimum, it'll be augmented by $500 million, potentially more. Although I think the odds for that are a little bit less than even. But that augmentation by my kind of back of the envelope calculation should allow for all applications that scored an 86 in cycle 5 to be funded. That's pending confirmation from the CTC and it going through it. They're going through the process of awarding those allocation funds. But by my calculations, that's how much the threshold score should be lowered. So we'll see exactly the confirmation of that, I believe, in sometime around August or so. Next slide, please. So again, these are the requirements around disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. And here's generally what is evaluated in an ATP grant. Again, with the actual points differentials varying from project type to project type. Next slide, please. So a little bit about why I'm here presenting to you on this. We at the Safe Routes Partnership have been deeply involved in the ATP since its founding. I serve on the ATP Technical Advisory Committee, and we participate in the guidelines process every cycle quite in depth. We also, and I think this is why we're invited to participate here, since cycle 4, we've been providing technical assistance to a number of communities throughout the state, usually 5 per cycle in their application process. We also put on a webinar series starting last cycle. We are now in the habit of doing 3 webinars per ATP cycle, focus on various parts of the application. So last time around, we did one, and Corey actually joined us for it, on about a year ahead of the application deadline, on sort of what applicants should be focusing on a year out, as well as an overview of the Healthy Places Index and the public health questions of the application. And then we usually wrap up by just kind of doing an overview on what's changed in the guidelines and the applications since the previous cycle, so that applicants who may be familiar with the program just don't get caught off guard by something that's changed and they weren't aware of it. We published an ATP guide as well, which we'll be updating later on this summer. And in cycle 5, our technical assistance, we like to think, was quite impactful. All the communities we worked with, except for 1, scored an 86 or higher. 2 have already been confirmed that they're getting funding, both from the SCAG area, actually. San Bernardino County Public Works for work in the unincorporated area of Muscoy, that got a 97. And the city of Barstow as well will be getting funded through the MPO component, also in San Bernardino County. And again, we're optimistic that the other communities will benefit from the augmentation and finally get their applications funded as well. We take a good amount of pride in that, and particularly in Muscoy. They applied in cycle 4 for essentially the same project, or at least a project in the same area, targeting the same community, and received a score somewhere in the mid 70s. And after we worked with them, not only because of our help, because we also brought in a lot of other partners, but they ended up scoring a 97 in cycle 5, so, a difference of more than 20 points. So it's really just a reflection of the fact that we had the capacity to help them out, and also were able to bring to the assistance our experience with what tends to pay off the best in terms of scoping and public engagement. We encourage the agency to extend the boundaries of their application further than what they'd apply for in cycle 5, and it clearly paid off in terms of demonstrating to the evaluators how large a community might benefit, and that the project was actually going to meet the pretty demonstrable need of the community, which was there was a little bit of a disparity of that in cycle 4 as well. So we helped them work that through, and we're quite proud and happy of the change in portions from one cycle to another. Next slide, please. Sorry, that's again from a previous. I seem to have sent the wrong slides in, and I apologize for this. Next slide, please. So I think I can actually wrap up there. I'm getting called in for something a little bit extraneous. If we could fast forward to my contact information at the end. There we go. Thank you. Here's my contact information. We are currently accepting applications for cycle 6. Technical assistance. We'll be accepting them on a rolling basis. The initial deadline is June 30th. If you're interested in applying to the ATP, and if you have either not been successful in the past or you've never applied, partly because the process seems daunting, which it certainly is. We're here to help. And we'd love to talk to you about what your community needs might be. And so please, whether you have a project in mind that you want to apply for, or whether you're a little bit undecided about what kind of which improvements you might think your community might want to pursue through the ATP, we can help talk that through. In every given cycle, we work with communities who are kind of coming into the process with a range of at various points in the process. Some want to just work on improving their previous ATP application, as I mentioned before. Some are brand new to the program, really don't even know exactly what they want to be working on. And we're happy to work with communities at every end of that spectrum. So please shoot me a line if you think this is something that that you might want to help with. And with that, I'll see it back to the moderators. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And we have put the link to the Safe Routes Partnership into the chat pod. Does anybody have any questions for Jonathan? Feel free to raise your hand, type something in the chat box. I do have one question. Jonathan, is there anything that sets the active transportation program apart from other funding programs, do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure how you mean that. It is unique in the country in the sense that California is, I believe, still was the last time I checked, the only state that kind of combines all of its various funding streams for walking and biking safety, whether that's the federal funds, the Safe Routes funds. It used to have a bicycle account, things like that, and it kind of combines it all into this competitive grant program, which is, I believe, unique in the country. That California does that.
It is,
and it is certainly not the only funding source in California that can be used for active transportation improvements. The local streets and roads program can also be used for that, but it really is, I think, the funding program that's kind of most targeted to those improvements, and that's why it has an evaluation process and evaluators who I think understand that particular part of the transportation world more specifically than evaluations in other programs. I mean, what's not unique about the ATP is how oversubscribed it is. Again, we did have a thankful and much needed augmentation this cycle, and we are seeing some good signs about a potential increase in federal funds coming into the program through the federal transportation bill reauthorization program. Again, nothing on that's been confirmed, but I think there does seem to be a kind of a shared recognition across the state that there needs to be some sort of new funding stream for the program going in. And so we're, whether or not that'll materialize in terms of cycle 6 is a little bit early to tell. We're certainly engaged in trying to advocate for that. But in that sense, I think certainly the kind of the way it's been pulled together into this one statewide program is unique in the country, as far as I'm aware.
Well, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Okay, before we move on to our next speaker, Jennifer, if you just pull up our 4th poll question. Does a lack of data that identifies safety problems make a proposal less likely to receive funding? See where we get. Looks like that's a pretty easy answer. Almost 100% have indicated that yes, and that is absolutely true. Data is very, very important to funding proposals. So let's move from our poll question to our last speaker, and that's Hannah Keys, who is a senior regional planner with SCAG. She has experience in program implementation, operations, and project management. She has also worked in process mapping and optimization, building effective relationships. She also has experience, obviously, in terms of funding, and she's going to talk about the types of funding that is available through SCAG. So Hannah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pam. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about SCAG's Sustainable Communities Program and then go over some grant writing best practice. Jonathan went over several of these items in his ATP presentation. So I'll go quickly through my slides. On to the next slide, please. So I'm starting off talking about SCAG's Sustainable Communities Program. We are in the midst of the 2020-2021 call for applications. Next slide. So since 2005, SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, has provided resources and direct technical assistance to local jurisdictions via the Sustainable Communities Program. I'll call it SCP going forward. The 2020 SCP provided local jurisdictions with 3 opportunities to access funding and resources to meet the needs of their communities, address recovery strategies considering COVID-19, and to support regional goals. Of the 195 funded projects since 2013 through SCAG's local implementation efforts, so far 109, or as of FY20, 109 projects have been completed, totaling approximately 15 million. And additionally, by the end of FY 22-23, another 86 projects are anticipated to be completed, and that'll bring us to another 15 million. The call for applications is typically on a 2-year cycle and aligned with the state ATP funding. Next slide. So these are the overarching SCP program goals. To provide needed planning resources to local agencies for multimodal planning efforts, sustainability, land use, and planning for affordable housing, to promote and address and ensure health and equity in regional land use and transportation planning, and to close the gap of racial injustice and better serve our communities of color, to encourage regional planning strategies to reduce motorized VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, particularly in environmental justice communities where there's the highest need for air quality improvements. To implement strategies from Connect SoCal, which includes developing local plans that support the implementation of these strategies and goals that are outlined in Connect SoCal's Sustainable Communities Strategy. Some more Connect SoCal key connections as well. So we provide resources that support the key connections as outlined in Connect SoCal, including shared mobility, mobility as a service, smart cities and job centers, accelerated electrification, GO zones, and housing supportive infrastructure. And everything about our implementation strategies and Connect SoCal key connections is all available in our Connect SoCal plan. And the next goal is to support a resilient region that looks to climate adaptation and public health preparedness as key strategies to address community prosperity, transportation safety, economic recovery, and sustainability. And then finally, to increase funding for the region and increase the competitiveness for federal and state funds, including the ATP and greenhouse gas reduction funds. Next slide. The 2020 Active Transportation and Safety Call for Applications was one of our calls, the first call, included $4.7 million in ATP and SB1 funds with 3 main project categories. And these project categories were community-wide or area plans, quick build projects, and network visioning and implementation. Next slide. So I won't read through the details of each of these, but these are the goals specific to the SCP Active Transportation and Safety goals. And we really at SCAG are prioritizing historically disinvested communities of color, and making sure that these investments, these funding investments, are really going to the communities that need them and are aligned with our overarching regional goals and our goals to increase equity and reduce vehicle miles traveled and create a more sustainable Southern California. Next slide. So I very quickly went over the 3 different project types, but this gives a little bit more of an example of what each of those project types represent. So community or area-wide plans would be citywide or citywide active transportation plans or Vision Zero plans. Quick build projects is something that we have started focusing on recently, which includes protected bike lanes, scramble crosswalks, bulb outs, and curb extensions. And these really allow for a much faster turnaround time from conception to implementation and evaluation, and that can help eventually support long-term infrastructure. And then finally, network visioning and implementation. And this includes network vision planning and quick build project implementation. Next slide. So a little bit more on some example project types. So we have transportation safety focused plans, active transportation plans, first last mile plans, local road safety or safe system plans, network visioning and implementation, as I said before, pedestrian master plans. I'd also toss in bike master plans, and then quick build projects. Next slide. So SCAG really prioritized projects that are focused on equity and really center equity deep within the project inception. And these projects also, the successful projects include robust community engagement, something I'll talk about a little more when I get into some grant writing best practice, and are really implementation focused and focused in target areas with a real demonstrated need. And this is just an example of some of the projects, plans, and demonstrations and quick builds that we have funded in recent years. Next slide. So there is an upcoming opportunity. SCAG is going to release a 4th call for applications for the Sustainable Communities Program for programs and projects centered on civic engagement, equity, and environmental justice. And that call is going to be released in the fall of 2021. This call will also include safety-related project types. Civic engagement plans inform technical planning work, focus on civic engagement to improve racial and social equity and local capacity. And these represent multiple different programmatic areas. We have arts, culture, and design, which is projects that integrate arts, culture, and design into strategies for strengthening communities. These can bring new attention to or support additional resources for a place or a community issue or for the local economy, especially a salient point following up on COVID-19. And this can also help to envision creative possibilities for a community or place, an innovative future, a way of overcoming a challenge, or an approach to problem solving. We also have parks, green, open, and public space. And these are projects that develop and improve equitable access to these spaces and improve opportunities for physical activity, thus supporting public health goals, access to nutritious and affordable food via gardens, farmers markets, produce stands, build community connections, capacity, and social capital. For safety and community, these projects support community ownership, equitable access to resources, and shared trust between governments and its constituents. And this allows partnership at all levels, addressing the complex and multi-layered influences to promote safety and community. And this is something that we've really focused on with our environmental justice and equity work at SCAG in the last year. The next project type is the climate action and resilience. These projects increase resilience and reduce the impacts from climate change, delivering positive social, environmental, and economic outcomes through community participation and preparation, and really resilience looking towards climate change impacts that are coming for our region, including heat waves, storms, floods, droughts. We want to make sure that that the SCAG region is really prepared to be resilient in the face of climate change. And then we have local campaigns and organizing. Projects that utilize project ideation, research, and direct action, and help people to really engage and redefine their relationships to each other and to people in positions of power. And this really builds a lot of, it helps build civic engagement and connection to institutions and helps people to recognize the power that they have. And then finally, we have community healing and repair. So these are projects that promote public dialogue to change narratives and advance possible policy solutions to violence. Projects that support mental and physical health, emotional support, community dialogue and reflection. Projects that support restorative justice, leadership development, creative arts, and other trainings, positions within environmental justice areas, and focus on planning. And so that was a lot of information that I have shared with all of you about this upcoming call, but it's a really, really exciting opportunity for additional funding focused on these areas. And there's more information on SCAG's website. So if you are interested, feel free to dig in on that. Next slide, please. So one last thing I wanted to note for SCP, although this aligns well into my transition into some grant writing best practices, is that SCAG offers support through our Go Human program, and we really encourage applicants for ATP, SCP, for whatever grant funding program you're going after, really, to include Go Human resources in your applications to support your community engagement plans. And I'm sure many of you have heard about Go Human, but if you haven't, feel free to look it up. We have a robust website for Go Human. But also on this slide, you can see our kit of parts. The top two and the bottom right image, all are examples of our kit of parts. We have a little pop-up parklet. We have decorative crosswalks. We have pop-up bike lane. We also have some safety co-branding that you can see in the bottom left there, where we will produce these yard signs and all sorts of safety co-branding that we brand with your jurisdiction's logos. So feel free to reach out to the Go Human team if you want more information about that. All right, next slide, please. So how do you make your application stand out in the pile? As we heard from Jonathan, the ATP is very much oversubscribed, and it's very hard to compete for these funds, but there's not enough funds to meet the need across the state. They're incredibly competitive, and so we want to provide a few tools and recommendations for how you can make your application stand out. Next slide, please. So this is a very important point, which is the distinction between community outreach and community engagement. And this is something that happily is really being emphasized with ATP and SCP, which is really focusing on having projects come from the community, having community members identify the what and the where of the need, instead of outreach, which is really bringing a project that's mostly fully baked to a community, sharing it out, and maybe asking for reactions and maybe integrating some of their comments. But the idea behind this is really working with the community early on so that they are invested in the project and so that they are able to help you to co-create a project that really meets their needs. Next slide. Another very useful tool is walk and bike audits. And this is really in partnership with the previous slide, where it allows you to be in the community. And this is something that we're starting to see happening more and more as we're coming out of COVID and as the state's opening up, that we have these opportunities to be on the ground with community members and really experience what they experience and get direct insights from them in that way. Next slide. There are also significant data resources available online that can help you add complexity and add more data-based analysis to your applications. And as we saw in that poll, pretty much everyone on the call recognizes that having data to back up the safety needs and really all of the needs that you're saying in your applications that you have is really vital. And so these are just a series of resources that we can definitely provide links to that you can look at to help determine where the greatest need is and how competitive your project proposal really could be. Next slide. So another way to get really wonderful feedback, maybe once you have an ideation already that came from your work directly with the community is to do community events. And two great examples of this that are really in tandem are demonstrations and the Go Human Kit of Parts. So demonstrations really allow you to, and these can be longer term, maybe out for a few weeks to a couple of months, or even something that's just up for a weekend. If there's a farmer's market, maybe you can put up a little pop-up bike lane at the farmer's market and have people react to something that's actually on the ground. It's not something that's going to stay forever, but it gives them a better sense than a drawing or a rendering. So these can be really great ways to get people excited about a project. Next slide. So as I mentioned with the data slide, is that it's really important to identify the real needs of your location, and also you can do a little bit of chicken and the egg, identify the needs or identify the location, but you want to work closely with the community to determine what those needs are. Are you focusing on safety countermeasures, health impacts? Are you close to schools and you want to reduce impacts on students? Make sure that you are really aligning your project with the identified need, and specifically with the community identified need, so that you are proposing treatments that are really in alignment with that need. All right, next slide. So one item that has been highlighted in the active transportation program in the most recent cycle is the notion of a transformative project. And this concept really is that you want the project to have a large impact. And there's lots of discussion at the state level about what is transformative. And I'm sure if you were involved in the last cycle at all, you heard some of these conversations. But you want to make sure that the project reflects the needs of the community and the culture of the community, and that community members feel ownership of it. And there can be a lot of value into having something that community members are really involved in the design of and feel excited about the design of, and that can help build community and political support. Next slide. So this was mentioned in Jonathan's presentation, I believe, that adding non-infrastructure elements to your infrastructure project can be really valuable and can also help you score a little bit higher on your application. And that can include education programs, demonstration events like we've talked about, or community walks or rides. And these really add an element where, yes, you're applying for funding to build this bike lane, but you want to have the community continue to stay involved and to learn about it and to understand why it's going to be there, how they can use it, how it can benefit them, and really have it be a back and forth learning experience. All right, next slide. So this is my final slide, and really a very key one, which is scoring rubrics are available for almost every grant program that you'll apply for. And I have reviewed many applications, and I have to say one of the most significant factors in comparing two comparable projects is how well the rubric is read by the proposer. Are you actually looking at the question being asked, and are you fully answering the question? If I read a proposal and they have 1,000 words that they can use, and they only use 100 words and they only address one part of the question, it's very hard to give full points, even if it seems like an interesting project. So look at the rubric and design your proposal around that and write towards it. And tell a story. Remember your audience. You have folks who are reading many proposals or many applications for these grant funding projects, and telling a story that really paints a picture of the place and of the impact that this project will have makes a huge difference. And one key thing to keep in mind is that in general, for these programs, the program administrators make it a goal to not have evaluators be located where the project is. So I didn't review any ATP projects in Southern California. I only reviewed Northern California projects because I have a vested interest in Southern California. So keep that in mind, that whoever's reviewing your project is very likely not all that familiar with your location. So telling that story is really essential. All right, next slide. So feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues if you have any questions about applying for SCP, applying for the upcoming call, or grant writing best practices, SCAG also offers technical assistance if you want help doing figuring out if your project is maybe a good potential project to apply for, if there's something you need to be doing right now to prepare to submit for the next cycle, start doing your community engagement early. But at this time, I will pause to see if there are any other questions from the group.
Thank you so much, Hannah. We're just about out of time, but are there any questions before we close out? Okay, into the chat pod, I have a chat box. I have put information in there on an evaluation survey. Please take a couple of minutes and answer that survey. We'd like to know what you liked, what you feel could be improved, any other topics that you might be interested in. We also urge you to participate in the remainder of our peer exchanges. We have 12 of them. This is our second one, so there's 10 more. And there is a link that will take you right to where a whole list of the dates and times for those upcoming ones are. And again, thank you for participating. We really appreciate it. And I really liked what Hannah said at the end of hers, which is to tell a story. And one of the things that's remarkable about safety is that it is a story. You know, it's more than just numbers, it's people. And, you know, if you can put that into your proposal, it can really make the difference. Any closing questions or comments before we go?
Yeah, Pam, I just wanted to flag that Anna Moneymaker, my own name, saying it wrong, from Metro, put in the chat some information about their grant writing assistance for the ATP program, and then also the Metro TOC grant writing program, assistance program in there.
Thank you. LA Metro has an excellent program, and Anna, thank you very much for putting that in. Any other suggestions? Okay, well, we have 1 minute left, so we'll close it out 60 seconds early. And again, thank you very much for participating. We will be sending out to everyone who participated a copy of the presentation. Take care and be safe.